First is the baptism in the Spirit. We have spent considerable time reflecting on that already. The inauguration of his ministry was inspired by the Spirit. So we can expect the prophecy of Isaiah becoming true in Jesus. He will restore justice. He will inaugurate the messianic reign. But he will do this in humility and in meekness. He who is humble of heart. What Peter described in the second reading is part of the baptism in the Spirit that we see in Jesus. Jesus performs his ministry with power, with authority. But unlike the authority of the scribes and the Pharisees, remember that? His authority comes from God, and his authority is the authority to heal, to do good in the name of God. The healing miracles, all of these things, especially the healing that comes to sinners, all of these are part of his baptism in the Spirit, the beginning of his ministry that extends to his whole ministry. But how about the baptism in fire? When was Jesus baptized in fire? This happened on the cross. The cross of Christ is another baptism. And in fact, that is the final baptism of the servant of God, the suffering servant of God, to serve up to the bitter end, and to serve not anymore with water from the Jordan washing me, but to serve with my blood being poured out as a ransom for the many. The baptism of Jesus is a whole process of ministry framed by two baptisms: the inaugural baptism in the Spirit and the ending baptism in death on the cross. But those are two beautiful beginning and end to a life of ministry. You begin with baptism in the Spirit, and you end offering your life and expiring your spirit, breathing the Spirit as an act of service, the last act of service. So the ministry of Jesus is framed by those two baptisms. And Jesus was not only baptized in the Spirit and in fire. He will baptize us in spirit and in fire. In our own baptism, we have received the Holy Spirit so that our whole lives will be devoted as a pleasing sacrifice of service to God. Let us allow the Holy Spirit to move into our lives. Let us not waste the gift of our first baptism in the Spirit. When we were baptized, we received the Holy Spirit to enable us to live for God and to serve God and God's kingdom, to draw power from the Spirit the way Jesus was empowered by the Spirit, to work for justice, not by being unjust, but by being humble and meek. But you know, in baptism, when we were baptized in the Spirit, we were also baptized into the death of Christ. St. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, said, "Don't you know that you who were baptized into Christ, you have been buried with Christ. You have died with Christ." So when we were baptized, we received both the baptism in the Spirit and the baptism in fire. We have died. But we hope that these two baptisms will mark our service. Malapit na naman po ang campaign season and later on the election. Sana naman the baptism of Christ and the baptism that we have received would mark the ministry of those who will campaign and will be eventually elected, and mark also the ministry of all of us, even if we are not called to public service, but still called to serve. We would want to remember the great men and women of our faith and of our nation who were empowered not by the spirit of greed and domination, but by the spirit of the living God. And so they became selfless in their quest for justice. Let us remember and sing the praises of our national heroes. Who will not be moved by the testimony of a Rizal, a Bonifacio? Who will not be moved by the countless men and women who sacrificed their lives in order to pursue the good of our nation? Who will not be moved by a Ninoy who experienced his own baptism of fire, being bathed by his own blood on that tarmac? And who is not moved by the death of our own Cory Aquino, whose death became still a moment of service? I call on parents, I call on teachers, I call on military people, I call on the police, I call on the ordinary market vendors, drivers. All of us are called to serve. I call on my fellow priests on this year for the clergy, and I make a special appeal to those of you who are ambitioning to have positions in government. Please, not ambition, but the Spirit of the living God. Only then will you be willing to be baptized into fire, the fire of death. If not, you will kill not only individuals, but the whole nation. Let us learn from Jesus. Only Spirit-inspired and motivated service will save. The word has been exposed. Let us now fulfill it.